sometimes when I think about all the comedians that I've been around who are no longer doing it, um, I mean, the vast majority of people who start out like I do just don't make it. They just, for one reason or another, they it's hard to make it, and everything has to line up just right.
Mhm.
And um, it just shows me that you've got to be funny. That's very important, but you also have to have a very good work ethic, and that's
Mhm.
equally important, maybe even more important.
All right, welcome to the Path Distilled. I'm your host, Kevin Harris. My co-host is Lauren Tashman,
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Path Distilled.
and we're excited today to have Brian Bates. He's a stand-up comedian, and he's also the co-host of Nateland podcast with Nate Ragazzi. Welcome to the show today, Brian.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And so, could you tell us a little bit about what you currently do and introduce the audience?
Yeah. So I'm a full-time stand-up comedian, which means I currently don't do a lot. And but before the pandemic, I was traveling the country doing shows at comedy clubs and theaters and things like that. And I'm still doing some shows, a lot fewer these days, but there's still some comedy clubs that are open and usually at 50% capacity. And so I'm doing stand-up comedy when I can, and also the podcast, as you mentioned a couple of months ago. Nate Bargatze, who I opened for on the road, he started a podcast called Nateland Podcast, and myself and Aaron Weber join Nate each week, and it's a lot of fun, and it's given us a new creative outlet throughout this pandemic, and so yeah, that's basically what I do these days. I'm a newlywed, and
Oh,
we
wow.
just moved into a new house, so I've got that on my plate. But yeah, that's what I do.
Nice. And I'm looking forward to hearing your story. Could you take us back to when you first got involved in comedy?
Yeah, so I started very late in life for a stand-up comedian. I was 35 when I first started doing it, and most of the guys that and girls that I was starting with, or, in their 20s, usually early 20s. That's when most stand-up comedians um, get their start. And um, my dad passed away in December of 2006, and I remember thinking, I want something to kind of, not a distraction so much, but kind of a distraction, something to cheer me up, something new, focus in my life, and something maybe to just help get my mind off of it. And I'd always been a fan of stand-up comedy, and my friends had always told me I was funny, but I didn't really think about it as a career. But I saw where there was a stand-up comedy class being offered. It's a 4-week class, and I thought, oh, I'll go do this class. It'll be fun, hopefully, and we'll see what happens. That was January of 2007, a month later, and I'd never been around a stand-up comedian. In my mind, I felt like they're probably not people I could identify with, and kind of unapproachable in a sense. But the guy who taught the class, his name is Rick Roberts, and he was a very good, down-to-earth guy and funny, but yet approachable. And he's still a mentor to me today. And I took that class in January 2007. It's a 4-week class. And at the time I thought, okay, I'll do this, then I'll be done with it. But I really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed the people in the class. And we started going to some local open mics together in Nashville. That's where I live, is here in Nashville. And started making friends, and kind of got a little competitive as anything does, and really started enjoying it. And then the next thing I know, I'm still doing it and keep going. And then I start traveling to do these terrible shows just because you just got to do it, and not really making any money. But over time, um, I started getting a little serious. So a few months in, I'm like, you know what? I think I'm going to keep doing this for a while and still work my day job. So that's when I started getting a headshot made. I got my first headshot made because they were They said, you got to have a headshot if you're a comedian. And oh, there it is right there. And my wife told me the other day, she's like, you look older in that picture than you do now. That's from 13 years ago. And I don't know what I'm doing with my hand, but yeah, that's when I'm like, all right, I'm getting serious about it. I'm going to try to do this. But I had a day job working at a local TV station here in Nashville. And I'd been there for quite a while, since college. So I didn't quit my job day one. I actually, for 8 years, worked my day job at the TV station, and then I would pursue stand-up comedy. And finally, I got to the point in my career where I'm like, you know what? I think I could do this full time. And everyone said, don't quit until you absolutely have to, until it's really becoming a problem. And for 6 months, I lived off just my stand-up comedy salary to see if I could do it, and I could. So yeah, I quit my job after almost 20 years working at the same place. I quit my job, and that was 5.5 years ago. And so for the last 5.5 years, I've been full-time stand-up comedy.
So I'm curious, were you writing before you took the comedy class, or did you start writing after the comedy class?
I started writing after. I mean, occasionally I remember my church had a talent show, and I got up and did some jokes that I'd written there, and that went well. And occasionally at a work function or something, maybe I would get up and say something funny. But no, I never did really write much. Besides that one church event, I never wrote until I took the class.
There's a huge gulf. And sorry, Lauren, I'll go back. There's a huge gulf between the open mics and actually getting paid, as many comedians know. So could you take us from those first open mics until how you got that first paying opportunity?
Yeah. So like I said, I started January 2007. I remember my first paying gig was a Christmas party the end of that year. And there was 4 guys that we'd all took the comedy class together. So we're all about the same level. And one of them, I think actually I did, someone MySpace me and said, hey, we're doing this Christmas party. I can't remember how they even found, maybe they just found me somehow. And they said, would you guys be interested in coming to do it? And we said, yeah. I mean, we were so excited. And none of us had much time like that we could fill, but 4 of us together, we could fill the time. And we each priced ourselves at $50 each. So I remember going to meet with this Christmas party planner, and our total budget was $200. They were kind of like, that's it? But we were so excited. We were like, wow, we're making money doing it. And I remember it was I don't know if you guys are familiar with Nashville at all, but it was upstairs at the Wild Horse Saloon, which is a popular country music dance venue there. And so there was a band playing below, and we were in a private room upstairs. It was kind of a bad experience because there was music thumping through the walls, and none of us were that funny. I mean, we'd been in it less than a year. So we were excited, but at the same time, I think we kind of realized that didn't go that great. That's my first paid gig. And then I went a long time probably before my next one. And it was always just small money here and there. But then gradually just started building up a little bit. Yeah.
So are you writing, are you actively writing at this point, or do you have a schedule, or are you writing things as they come to your mind that you think is funny? How is that going at the time?
I've done both. There's been times when I've scheduled myself to sit down and write each day. And then there are times where it just kind of, when it hits me. Lately, that's been the case. I'll be honest, during the pandemic and when I don't have any pressing gigs, I feel less motivated at times to know that. I know that's not what this podcast is about. It's supposed to be about chasing your dreams and not being lazy, but
not necessarily. It's a very human response, so don't worry about that.
It's a little bit like cramming for a test. I feel like at times, if I see something on the horizon, my brain focuses, and I'm like, I gotta start writing. I gotta get creative. But when there's nothing on the horizon, I feel less motivated at times to be creative and write. But at the same time, 2020 has been such a crazy year, especially for me getting married and now living with my wife during the pandemic. I've certainly written some new material and gotten a few chances to perform it, and it's going well.
So I'm curious about, I have a question about what you were just talking about, but I'm curious kind of going back a little bit to your experience in that class that you took.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit more about that and what type of feedback you got?
Yeah. So it's a lot of comedians don't feel like you should take a stand-up comedy class, or they'll think you can't learn anything from it. If you're funny, you're funny. And I get that. I would agree with that to a large portion, but it can certainly help you with some other areas. Just basic stage presence, some basic speaker guidelines, helps you build confidence, helps you know how to move the microphone stand, some stuff we take for granted. It also helped me build a rapport with some of my classmates. So when we would go to open mics, I already had a friend and someone to lean on, and that's important. You can't underestimate that. But then it would also show you some basic writing skills and some ways to just make your jokes tighter and edit and help you understand how to formulate a joke. And it's all kind of about finding your voice, and different styles work for different people. The teacher was very encouraging. It wasn't high pressure, but we did get to do a little performance at the end of the class for our friends, and that was fun. And our friends were very encouraging. So early on, I felt like, man, I'm the greatest comedian in the world, because all my friends were coming. I'm like, this is not hard at all. I am nailing it. But then in time, your friends are like, oh, you're still doing that? Okay, well, I'm not going to come this time. And then you just start having to make strangers laugh, which is, totally different and a lot harder.
And that's kind of what I was curious about, related to what you had been talking about with motivation. You mentioned that you were doing it kind of like as a side gig at first, right? And then have now switched to doing it full time. Can you tell us a little bit about that transition and what's similar or different for you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I avoided some of the mistakes that young people make by getting into it later in life. I'd worked in a real business for a long time and had some basic people skills that probably helped me. So I think I avoided some of the pitfalls that some people make, although I certainly made my fair share. And then when I first quit my job, though, I remember I needed some structure. I'm used to going to work at a certain time and having meetings at this time. And now I'm on my own. I'm dependent on myself to be self-motivated. And I remember I had a hard time adjusting to this new lifestyle where it's kind of dependent on me to a large degree. So there was a mind shift there, trying to figure out how to allocate my time wisely. And there's also, when you're out and about at a job, there's some external stimulus that lead to creating and writing. And now I'm stuck in that time, my little condo and all day. And I remember I quit my job at the end of 2014. So it was right at Christmas time and winter. And I remember it was just getting dark at 4:00 in the afternoon, and it was kind of depressing. So right out of the gate, I remember thinking, I don't know if I made the right decision or not, but a few months in, 2 or 3 months in, I started kind of finding my groove, and things have been going great since then.
Well, I want to learn a little bit more. So you took the class in 07 and had the first paying gig at the Christmas of 07. And so 08. So what was,
I may have not even had a paying gig in 08. It was very small, very few. I don't really remember what my second paying gig was.
Well, Well, let me broaden it then. Between
Okay.
08 and when you were able to quit your job, how did that come about?
Well, I started, I guess I started getting, so the comedy club in Nashville is called Zany's Comedy Club, and it's a really good comedy club. And the process is, besides going to comedy open mics, you need to kind of hang out at the comedy club. And so I did a lot of just hanging out at night, which was killing me because I had to be at work the next morning. And I'm just hanging out there late at night. But that's a big part of it. They want to see that you're serious about it, and they want to build relationships. And then eventually they hear enough about you, or maybe they see you at open mic, that they offer you 3 minutes at Zany's. And then eventually, if you do that well, you get bumped up to 7 minutes at Zany's. And these aren't even paid gigs yet. These are just, you get to come perform at Zany's, which we gladly took. And then, you know what? I think my second paying gig was probably, I finally got to MC at Zany's. And I was so excited and so nervous. And, but, I got paid maybe $50 a show for that weekend. $50 seems like my going rate, apparently, now that I think about it. And, but I was so excited. And then eventually I got to MC a little bit more. And then the first big comedian that who asked me to do some shows with him was a guy named Henry Cho. And he was a veteran comedian that's still around, and I still do shows with him. And he wanted a clean opener, and I was clean, so that worked. And that was a big thing for me. And then Angela Johnson, another comedian who I used to do some shows with. This is probably about 10 years ago now. I started doing some shows with her. And then I built a relationship with Nate Bargatze, and we became good friends. And then Nate was already doing great when I met him, but certainly not to the point where he could start taking an opener on the road. But eventually he did start getting to the point where he could take openers on the road. He started taking me on the road with him whenever he could. And then this is over many years. I finally got to the point where with all that, I started getting played on satellite radio and started earning some royalties from that. With all that, and I'd been saving. And I finally thought, you know what? I think I'm at the point where if I'm very frugal, I could quit my job and do this full time. Mm-hmm. But in saying that, I still wasn't making much money even when I quit my job 5.5 years ago. But at the time I was single and living a frugal lifestyle and making it work.
You mentioned earlier there was a moment where you kind of second guessed that decision. How did you resolve that?
You know what? My job, I'd been at my same job for 20 years. It was a good job. I worked at the local TV station. I had really good close friends there. And I didn't realize how much my identity was wrapped up in my job mm-hmm. until I left it. Mm-hmm. And again, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. And so much of my identity was with my job. And then when I first quit, even though it was my decision, I kind of was like, wow, I should be in a meeting right now. It's 1:00. I should be in this meeting. And my self-worth, I had to kind of figure out, my self-worth and things like that. So it was just a little bit of adjustment period. So I can't imagine how hard it is for people who get furloughed or laid off or fired, because this was my decision and it was still hard for me. Mm-hmm. But I quickly adjusted and now I feel, great about it.
So would you say you've now kind of shifted and have fully taken on that kind of stand-up comedian identity?
Yes, I have. And I still have close friends at my old job and still see them. And when referencing the TV station I work at, I do find myself still saying we, because I was there for so long. But at the same time, so I guess I still feel somewhat identified with it. But at the same time, yeah, my mindset has definitely shifted. And I no longer, when I first left there, I wanted to know everything that was going on. I wanted to know the gossip. I wanted to know changes. And now just like any job, the longer you're gone, the less you identify with it because change happens. So now I don't care as much. I don't identify with it as much. Now I'm all about the gossip going on in stand-up comedy.
Do you find that, now having this identity as a stand-up comedian, are there kind of pros and I'll say cons, maybe challenges that come with that?
Yeah. People don't know. Yes. Here's one of the cons, I guess. People don't know how to relate to you, and they don't know how to talk to you. And when they find out I'm a stand-up comedian, like if I'm at the doctor's office or the dentist office or whatever, I try to avoid that because then they want me to tell them a joke or, and I'm in a very awkward situation with my mouth open at the dentist or whatever. And even if I wasn't, comedy just doesn't work that way where tell me a joke. That's not the way stand-up comedy works. So I try to avoid telling people when at all possible what I even do, because I just feel like they have a hard time identifying with it. But the pros, if you get it, you get it, and it's a pretty cool job. And I have some people who think I'm a lot bigger deal than I really am, and I let them think that. I go with it.
So what was it like the first time, because you're with Nate especially, you bound to play at some large venues. What was it like being on the stage for the first time in one of those larger venues?
Oh, it was great. It was, theaters are so great. They're really, to me, the easiest venue. And I get more nervous performing in front of 10 people than I would 1,000. Because I know with a large crowd, at least somebody's going to laugh.
Hopefully you'll hear it.
And hopefully I'll hear it. But with 10 people, maybe not. So theaters are really great. Everyone's facing you. That's very nice. At comedy clubs, there's people eating. They're maybe not facing you. There's waitresses walking around. Glasses are clinking. But in a theater, if it's done correctly, everyone's facing you. Everyone's paying attention. The laughs are different because if it's a really big theater, then you have to pause a little bit on your jokes because laughter really does kind of move to the back of the room. Mm-hmm. And so the timing's a little different, but it's really fun. It's a great experience. Yeah.
And you have a really good, I enjoy your comedic style. And it made me wonder, you're welcome. And it made me wonder if it's like many comedians, once they've become as good as you are at writing, if it's hard to make you laugh now or harder to make you laugh. Have you found that to be the case?
Yeah, I do actually. My standards have changed a little bit. And the comedians that I thought were so funny when I first started, now sometimes I don't feel that way. I was kind of a novice to stand-up comedy. I didn't follow it that close before I got into it. I knew the big names that everyone knows, but I didn't know some of the best comedians in the world because they haven't had a sitcom.
Yeah.
So when I first started and I'm taking a comedy class, I remember when we got to do a graduation show, and I thought I killed it. I thought, man, I'm doing so great, and all these comedians are so funny. But then the headliner was a real comedian, a guy had been doing it for years. And when he got up there, the difference was so drastic. I thought, this guy's the greatest comedian I've ever seen. Well, I still know that guy, and I don't feel that way anymore. No offense to him, but my standards have changed because I'm around comedy so much more, and I've heard so many of the different types of jokes and the styles. And sometimes I get frustrated with audiences because I'm like, why do you think this person is so funny? It's because they go to a comedy club maybe once a year, and I go all the time. So I've seen all these premises, and, some of them, their ideas is not fresh. It's kind of hacky, but I have to realize audiences don't know that. And I didn't know that until I got into comedy.
And so
sorry, that makes me, maybe we're going to ask the same thing, but it makes me curious about what all goes into this. Like you mentioned, you still go to shows, you listen to a lot of different comedians.
Right.
Maybe give some insight into that, because to your point before, I think it is not that common to kind of, for people like me, like anybody, to know exactly, the assumption probably is you just get up on the stage and tell some funny stuff, right? I know that that's not the case.
Right. Well, I remember, it's easy for me to sometimes say, and I do say this, and my friends sometimes say this, like, oh, that guy, his act is so dumb that only dumb people would like him and find him funny. However, I have good friends who are I consider very smart people that will go to a comedy club and they'll see this comedian and they think he's so funny, and then they'll tell me about him. And internally, I'm like, oh, good grief. But I can't call them dumb. They're a lot smarter than I am. It's just, you don't know any better. And it's all subjective. So everyone has different styles. I'm sure you would like some comedians I don't like. I'm sure I'd like some comedians you don't like. And we all have our own style. So there's really not a right or wrong, I guess. So did that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, and I was kind of curious too about, in terms of what you invest into your own process. Do you? It sounds like you spend a lot of time kind of watching other comedians.
Yes. Yeah, I still, again, pre-pandemic, I still go to open mics in Nashville. Not as much as I used to, but I still, if I have new material I want to try out, it's hard to do that in a theater where people are paying a lot of money to see you. It's not fair to them. So I got to try them out somewhere. So I'll go to open mics and try them out. And that's not always the best gauge, because most of the open mics are terrible and it's just other comedians there waiting to go up themselves. So they're not even paying attention. But you got to try it somewhere. So I still go to open mics when I can. I still try to write. I still try to hang out at comedy clubs when I can. It's a little bit different now that I'm married, because I try to balance my time a little bit better. But you got to treat it like a job, in the sense that it's not just when you're on stage performing. A lot of it's hanging out, a lot of it's writing, a lot of it's performing, practicing, basically. That's what open mics are. So social media is a big part of it. There's so many different factors that you really need to treat it like a job.
And this is only loosely related to that, but have you ever had a joke that you've been workshopping and either you really loved it and it never landed anywhere, like you couldn't get it to go an audience to love it as much as you did?
Yes, I've had many jokes like that. I was trying to think of an example to give you. I don't know if I can think of an example right offhand, but I've had so many jokes that either I just didn't tell it right or it was just funny to me, but I just could never get it to work. And I have had jokes, though, where maybe I tried it 5 years ago and they didn't work, but then it'll jog my memory, or I'll find it somewhere and I'll try it again. And now it works just because I've become a better comedian. So that's encouraging. But like, I'm not a great storyteller, and I've had some funny stories that I've tried to tell on stage, and that's a special skill. Nate Bargatze is a great storyteller, and he has this special skill to tell these stories, but that's not my strong point. And I've tried it, but it's not what I'm best at. And sometimes I'll tell stories and they just don't land like they should.
Well, have you ever found that combining two premises or jokes has helped one or the other?
Yeah. A lot of times I'll have a joke that just, I don't know what to do with it, or it doesn't seem to fit, or maybe it just doesn't get a good enough laugh. But then later on, maybe years later, I'll have a similar premise or similar type of joke, and that does work. And then I'll take that old joke and I can slide it in right there. And now that it has a home as well, either to go with that joke like a tag, or maybe just a good segue into another joke. But that's a great feeling when I have a joke that I didn't know what to do with, and now I have a home for it. It's like one of my children. I found a home for them. It makes me feel good.
You mentioned that story, you don't feel like storytelling is kind of your strong suit. What do you feel is your strong suit, or are your strong suits, and how did you recognize that or cultivate that?
I feel like I'm a better writer than I am performer. And I feel like there's some comedians that are great performers on stage, but they're not good writers. There's some comedians that are great writers, but not great performers. I mean, I hope I'm not a bad performer, but I think my writing is ahead of my stage presence. I'm not overly animated. I don't convey like, I don't know, like some comedians just command the stage somehow with their presence, and they have a lot of energy and they have a lot of just pizzazz, I guess. And they're good with voice inflection and impressions or act outs. You know, they can tell a story and do act outs, and you feel like you can just picture it. That's not really my strong point, but I feel like I'm a pretty good writer. I feel like I can do your set up punchline type jokes, and I feel like I'm pretty self-aware to the point where I'm sorry, it's getting darker in my room. I hope can you guys still see me?
Yeah, you're good.
I've got a big shadow on my face. But I think I'm pretty good at writing about, I feel like I'm good at knowing what my audience likes and how they see me. I think I see me that way. So there's some comedians that they'll write jokes about themselves, but their act doesn't fit their appearance. Does that make sense? And then the audience is kind of like, I don't see that. I don't see that in you. It doesn't seem authentic, usually because it's not. But I try to write very authentic and truthful stuff.
That's what I was going to say earlier. Your stage presence matches your personality, or what seems to be your personality. And I would go as far, do you consider yourself a cerebral or smart writer? Like, would you label your comedy then?
That. I don't usually say it publicly on a podcast, but when I'm at home, I think that, sure. I tell my wife that all the time.
Like, this is really good. Really brainy. Yeah, like I ask in part because that one joke, if the audience is interested, they can find it online or live whenever more shows are available. But you're talking about the accidentally texting yourself.
Yes.
And
that was funny. Kevin was sending me some of your stuff over the weekend.
Oh, thank you.
And then that moment where there's almost a pause where the audience, there's a lag. You can see the audience getting it, and then you get a applause break. And so I think that's rare, or difficult at least. If it's not rare, it's a difficult accomplishment. So I thought, the epitome that at least epitomizes in my mind a cerebral or smart writing. If there's that, it's such a smart joke that there's a lag before people can understand it, but then when they do, it just blows their mind.
Thank you. Unfortunately, sometimes they never get it. So I have a lot of those jokes too, where, oh, nope, they're still not getting it. I got to just move on. That joke's it's interesting you mentioned that joke, because it's the only one I think I've ever had where I know that happened to another comedian a little bit, not exactly the way I worded it, but he really did accidentally text himself, and it was something similar like that, and he forgotten. And I thought it was so funny. And it was a joke where I felt like I could easily see that happening to me. And I felt like it would work well with my material. And this comedian, he's a local guy. He's very funny, but he's not doing it full time. And he wasn't even telling it as a joke. He just told me in a conversation about this. And I kept telling him, you need to try that as a joke. And this is not his thing. So finally I said, well, could I try it as a joke? And he said, I absolutely, have at it. So then I wrote it as my own. But that one, actually, that's the only joke I have where I borrowed that from someone else.
I was going to ask where you tend to get your inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, it does help when comedians talk about finding their voice, and I don't know what that means exactly, but I do think after a while, you finally kind of figure out what doesn't work for you, and maybe what does work for you. And for me, I have a lot of self-deprecating jokes. I have a lot of kind of real personal jokes and things like that. Nothing crazy. I'm clean. And now that I open for Nate so much on the road, I certainly it helps me to better understand what I should be doing, because Nate's audience is like clean, and my style is not the same as Nate's, but it's not that different either, if that makes sense.
So what have you learned?
Somebody keeps trying to call me. I'm sorry. I hope you can't hear that.
No.
I can't.
Okay, good.
So what have you learned? What have you learned about yourself throughout all this?
Gosh, I hope I've learned something. It'd be bad if I haven't learned anything. I've learned how to be a little bit more of a self-motivated person. I was used to having a boss that, to some degree, I was doing it just not out of fear, but like all of us, to some degree, we do it because, we don't want to get in trouble. So first it's your parents, and then it's your teacher from first grade through college. And then you get a job and you have a boss. So there's always somebody that's checking your work. So when I quit my job and had to start to become my own boss, it was the first time in my life where it was up to me to get the job done. So that's one thing I've learned, how to be a little bit more self-motivated and work for myself.
And by no means was it a short path, but
no,
by comparison, like they're just like musicians, there are people that toil for years and never end up with the level of success that you had. Have you had any comments or criticisms by other comedians that you somehow got a shortened path? Or
not to my face, at least. I'm sure maybe behind my back, but and I've said that about plenty of comedians myself. It has not been a short path. I've been doing it for 13 years, and I'm still, it's not like I'm setting the world on fire, but at the same time, I do realize how fortunate I am. The majority of the people who start stand-up comedy don't do it very long, and they quit. All the guys that I started doing, that took that class with, and we were doing it together, none of them are still doing it. And I realize how fortunate I am because I could easily have seen me, like, it's hard. It's really hard. I wasn't interested in going to open mics and hanging out with 20-year-old guys, and then I have to be at work the next morning, or hanging out at Zany's. So if I hadn't gotten a few breaks along the way, I wouldn't be doing it now. That wasn't even my goal originally, but I was fortunate, and I was blessed with some good fortune, and hopefully I'm making the most of it.
I was curious about that now that you kind of bring that point back. You mentioned that you started on the heels of your father passing away as kind of like a distraction. People told you, you're funny. Now, 13 years in, what drives you? What's the goal at this point?
Well, I mean, I'm not the most competitive person in the world, and I'm not the most driven, but I am somewhat competitive and somewhat driven. So I'm always trying to get better and do better. And now that I'm married, I feel like I have someone else that I want to do well for. In the past, there was, I guess, in the back of my mind, I thought, well, if I fail, I'm only hurting myself, and I'll just go do something else, I guess. But now I have a wife, and she doesn't need me, don't get me wrong. She makes a lot more money than I do. But at the same time, I want to feel like I'm contributing to this marriage, and I want to make her proud, and I just, so there's some extra motivation, I guess, to work hard and do my best and see what happens. Yeah.
So what advice would you have for an aspiring stand-up comic?
Well, be patient, be diligent, work hard in the sense that a lot of stand-up comedy is connections and meeting the right people, and that comes from hanging out, not just performing. And I mean, that's really the case for me. Even obviously, none of the people who asked me to open for them knew, just because they didn't know me by reputation. They got to know me, and they liked me, and then those relationships built. More specifically, for a brand new person, I would really suggest that they work clean, because it'll give you a lot more opportunities early on. You don't have to be clean the rest of your life if you don't want to, but and starting out, comedy clubs want clean openers. Comedians want clean openers. Even if the headliner is dirty, he doesn't want his opener to be dirty necessarily. He wants to save that for himself. So if you're clean, you can get so much more work, not just at comedy clubs, but corporate events. It leaves so many more doors open. And then if you're like, well, that's not my thing, eventually once you get more established, then maybe you can be more dirty. But it would really, it's important to be clean early on, just to keep more doors open.
Do you feel that the the dirty style of comedy, do you think it's waned in popularity a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it's gotten worse. I feel like in some ways, I don't know. I mean, the world's more PC for sure, and there's more cancel culture for sure. But at the same time, I do feel like maybe just because I'm around it a lot more, it's more and more dirty. Podcast, everything, just there's a lot of stuff out there that's not clean for sure. It's a good question. I guess I could see myself going either way. I feel like comedians are getting so dirty, but at the same time, maybe with some cancel culture going on, there's certain things they can't say anymore.
I just look back at the early 2000s, and it seemed like there was a trend. It seems like everyone was trying to outdo one another, or at least they were popularized, or it was well known that people were trying to I was trying to be dirtier than the next comedian, and it seems like that doesn't happen as much anymore. That might just be my imagination. Maybe I'm getting older.
No, you may be right. I mean, there's certainly still plenty of dirty comedians out there for sure. Shock value is still a thing, but I know what you're saying. Early 2000s, that's when maybe really it was happening. And there's a whole group of New York comedians that call themselves the Legions of Skank, and they those are good guys, and I know some of them, and they're very funny, but that's not my style, so to speak.
Sure.
I would imagine, though, there is, right, some cultural influence to the comedy, right? Like, I'm here in New York City, right? So kind of New York City comedy might have a particular flair versus Nashville versus another location, and then having to travel around and do different types of shows, that might be kind of an interesting consideration.
Yeah, I mean, I can see it. Like, did you say you're in New York? So I feel like New York has by far the best comedians anywhere, and I'm friends with some of those guys, and I've gone up there some to perform. But what you'll see often is, because they're stuck in the city, so much local references to subways and just things around the city, which works great there, but once they go out in the rest of the country, doesn't work as well. Whereas if you're in middle America, you maybe can identify a little bit better with audiences in the rest of the country.
I'm curious too, sorry, Kevin, because you mentioned you've been in it for 13 years, and while that might not sound like a long time, the world just keeps changing faster and faster. So what have been, since you kind of embarked on this, what have been some of the things you've noticed about how things have changed and how it's impacted you and how you have to approach things?
Well, when I got in, comedians that have been doing it a little bit longer than I have tell stories about having to send physical DVDs or even VHS tapes to comedy clubs to get seen. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, I avoided all that. By the time I started doing stand-up comedy in 2007, it's very similar to it is today, where you just email a link or something like that to clubs. And so that's good. I've just seen so much turnover. I still feel like I'm a newbie. I still feel like I'm a new guy on the scene. But sometimes when I think about all the comedians that I've been around who are no longer doing it, I mean, the vast, vast majority of people who start out like I do just don't make it. They just, for one reason or another, it's hard to make it. And everything has to line up just right. And it just shows me that you've got to be funny. That's very important. But you also have to have a very good work ethic. And that's equally important, maybe even more important. And when I say work ethic, I also mean basic people skills to be able to, work with people, things like that. I don't think that was your question exactly, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, it does.
You talked about the New York City specific references such as subways. I was just going to make a statement that things like sleep apnea resonates in the Midwest, right? Or anyway, they're more generalized.
Midwest, South, definitely. Yeah. And my audience, I mean, I work with some comedians that have older audiences. I mean, I'm 48. I'm considered older, I guess, but I have some comedians that I open for whose audiences are in their 50s and 60s. They're going to laugh at things that are different than an audience in their 20s and 30s. It's just natural. Some audiences are more majority women. Some audiences are, I don't know. They all have their own different flair. If the headliner has a following, you can usually kind of get a sense of what works and what doesn't. And when I first started comedy, for most of my career, I haven't had enough material that I can interchange it. I just got to do what I do and hope it works. But now I'm finally getting to the point where if I see this crowd just doesn't seem like they're going to like this or that, I'll change my set some. And I performed a couple weeks ago at a Moose Lodge here close to where I live. And the crowd they just weren't the brightest, I guess. I could just tell I have certain jokes that are for dumber audiences. I don't know how else to say it. And so the other comedians that were performing, I could see what was working, what wasn't. So I kind of quickly changed my set list to kind of bring out some of the easier jokes. That's a better way to put it. Easier jokes. And so I finally gotten to the point where I'm smart enough to figure that stuff out and have the material that I can. Not totally change my set, but you know what I mean? Make some adjustments.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned you just turned 48. When you search your name, it says Brian Bates, comedian. Age is one of the autofills. Do you know why people are so curious about your age?
No, I didn't even know that. But I'm curious. Is that maybe that's like that for a lot of people? I don't know. Is it not?
I don't know. I just I should probably check before I mention it. But
I can't imagine anybody's really cares how old I am, but I don't know. I've Googled people before and weird things will pop up, like I don't know, their wife or whoever. And I'm like, are that many people really asking that question, or is that just a standard go-to? I don't know.
I've noticed wife a lot. It'll come up. And so you were mentioning the advice for younger, or at least starting comedians.
Yeah.
A lot of the focus is whether or not people, the nature versus nurture debate, whether people tend to be born more, let me back up.
Yes.
Born with greater abilities to do things.
Right.
Then they don't necessarily have to cultivate that. That's an extreme on one end. The other side of that is they're really born with no natural ability and they have to cultivate all of it. And there's everything in between. What is your stance on that continuum?
Okay, that's a great question. I hadn't even really thought about that, but I would say it's a little both. I would say it's nature in the sense that I notice more comedians are left-handed. I'm left-handed. That generally means the right side of your brain is creative side. Mm. So I feel like there is something to that as far as the way you're born. I would say majority though is nurture, because so much of you can just tell by their material, life experiences is what's led them down this path. And I'm going to generalize here, but there's not a lot of good looking people that are doing stand-up comedy because their life is different than the rest of us that maybe has some stuff, and we use our sense of humor as a defense mechanism or as our way to deal with the world. And to take it a step further, there's no ways as many women stand-up comedians, female stand-up comedians. And it's not because I think they're born less funny. It's just I think society molds you to work on certain things. And women are told or taught to, you should do this, you should do that. With men, it's sense of humor is something that's embraced more, I feel like. Mm. And you use it to try to woo the woman, or so to speak. And so I just feel like culture and society has more to do with like women, and as far as how many of them pursue stand-up comedy and things like that, and our lifestyle. So I would say the majority is that'd be nurture, right? Nurture is your what happens in your life.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of comedians, again, to get up there who have great lives. I mean, don't get me wrong, I have a great life, but we tend to mind the stuff that happens. So many comedians, as you know, have suffered with depression and have had terrible childhoods, and then they use stand-up comedy as their coping mechanism. I guess you could say it could be nature if they were born with depression, but I feel like more times than not, it's like things that happen to them in their life that's led to this.
Wow. And do you think that was there anything before, and feel free not to answer this, but there was anything before that tragedy with your father dying that you think might have influenced your humor?
Well, I was never, if you've listened to my stand-up comedy, I was never like the ladies' man. I was never the great athlete. So I was always kind of the funny guy in school. And I did use humor as a coping mechanism, so to speak. I always really, and I still do, really want to be liked. I think that's a popular thing with a lot of stand-up comedians. We want to be liked, which is so weird that we do this profession where you put yourself out there to not be liked. But I wasn't the class clown, so to speak, in school. I was more drier humor, but I always wanted to make people laugh. And but that was based on because I wasn't good at other things. I wasn't the great athlete. I wasn't the homecoming king. I wasn't the guy who got all the girls. So I channeled other aspects.
Nice. And what's the biggest takeaway from your story?
Which story exactly are you referencing?
Just your life in comedy.
My life story? The biggest takeaway from my story. Oh my gosh. Oh, boy, that's a big question you just threw it there at me. I mean, I've had I'm very fortunate life. Don't get me wrong. I did not have some traumatic childhood experiences. Overall, my life's been, I've been very fortunate. So maybe if I had more traumatic experiences, I'd be funnier. Maybe I'd be a lot further in my career. So I wish now that I'd had some bad stuff happen to me so I could have a whole new hour special. Just think how great I could be right now as a comedian if more bad things had happened to me.
We'll all be funnier after 2020, it seems like.
That's for sure.
I feel like, Kevin, you are pursuing stand-up comedy. I feel like you want to be a stand-up comedian.
I'm surprised he didn't tell you that before we got on the call today.
So you used to do stand-up?
Yeah, I've done it in the past. I was at the point, the fork in the road where you chose comedy over career. I'd already been through some graduate school training,
Oh, wow.
and moved my wife across the country. And I was getting offers to go on the road full time, but because I don't want to make it sound like I'm blaming my wife, but I'd already been through that lifestyle. And,
she's going to listen to this episode, remember?
And I basically made the decision. There was a guy that had television credits that I recognized, and he was asking the club owner for more gigs because he was basically had to pay a bill. And I thought, well, if the margin is that thin for him, I don't want to spend another 5 years trying to make long story short, make a name out of for myself in comedy. So in some ways I gave up, and I regret giving up on it, but other ways I guess it was the right decision.
I think it's the total right decision. If you're in graduate school and you would have to go cross country with your wife. I think you made the right decision.
But yeah, and actually Keith Alberstadt was at my first open mic. I don't know if you know Keith.
I know Keith very well. Yeah.
Yeah. And he is kind of what you were saying. Of course, I was too much of a newbie to really compare myself to what you were saying, but you said you're a better writer than you are a performer.
Yeah.
And Keith's really positive feedback on my writing, but that's really about all he commented or bragged about was how good the writing was. So I guess I'm a better writer than performer as well.
Yeah.
You also, to be fair, you did spend a lot of time on it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I still write. So I stopped for a while and then it's back again. So my writing happens.
You still have that bug, I see.
Oh yeah.
Where do you live?
I'm actually back towards Middle Tennessee now. So.
Oh, you are?
Yeah. So.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah,
maybe I'll run into you someday.
Yeah. When I was gonna say when things calm down a little bit, we need to try to get together.
So when Keith Alberstadt, was that at Zanies in Nashville?
It was actually it's no longer there, but it was the bar car.
Oh yeah. Wow. So you definitely know the Nashville comedy scene then.
Yeah. It was a long time ago.
Yeah. That's great. That's great.
Ended up moving out of state after that original run there, and so probably kept me from getting as involved as you did, but so that's what happened there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could easily look right now with the pandemic. Check back with me a year from now, and I may be working at Kroger bagging groceries.
Yeah, it's tough on all the live performers, the musicians and comedians and everyone else.
Yeah, it's for sure. Yeah, so you know what I'm talking about. You know, it's very hard.
Oh yeah, and I'll stop because Lauren will remind me this isn't my episode. But, but yeah, I'm sure that the listeners will realize that I was geeking out asking you the questions. So it's just because I've been through a lot of it, and it was fascinating to hear you say.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you were a fan of comedy.
Yeah.
And that's why I thought, I bet he even wants to pursue it. But it sounds like you have pursued it.
Yeah. I've listed in my bio that I'm an occasional stand-up comedian, but it's been a few years since I've touched a stage. But
he used to test out a lot of jokes, not only on his wife, but on me also.
Yeah. Yeah, Lauren was my first work wife. So we're back in the day. So
Well, I'll just say the great thing about stand-up comedy is you're never too old to do it. And I mean, I was 35 when I first took that comedy class and went to that open mic, and I'm 48 now. And, but if you're willing to put in the time, I mean, music's so different, but in music, if you haven't made it by the time you're 30, you're probably not going to make it. But stand-up comedy, I know acts that are that's their act. They're the dirty grandma or whatever. And, you know, they're 70, 80 years old and still doing it. So it's never too late. So maybe when you retire, that could be your second career.
Well, after this episode, I might just relaunch.
Yeah.
You've inspired me.
Good.
Well, cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah. It's fun hanging with you guys.
The Path Distilled is hosted by Kevin Harris and Lauren Tashman, created and produced by Kevin Harris. The content is copyrighted by The Path Distilled, all rights reserved.